Now, some of my absolute favorite things to discuss in regards to Star Wars are the nature of the Force, good and evil, the dark side and the light. What does balance in the context of Star Wars in relation to the Force actually mean? What role are the Jedi supposed to play in all of it? And along those same lines, what does the ideal Jedi even look like? What type of mentality or philosophy are they even supposed to have or live by? And so, being interested in all this, one thing I've always tried to do is look for and consume and interpret as much as I could from George Lucas himself outside of the stories, to try and understand what his ideas for it were and where he's coming from with all of it. And though, as I've said before, I certainly will not claim to know his mind exactly, I do think, or hope at least, I have some sort of grasp on all of it. Though at the same time, I'm always open to discussions about what others think about his ideas, open to learning more and seeing things from other perspectives, which is why I love what I get to do here on this channel, that I get to discuss Star Wars with so many different people. Anyway, one person that I think has an amazing grasp or understanding of George Lucas's Star Wars or his ideas, maybe more so than anyone else out there, is Dave Filoni. And recently he did an interview with Nerdist, a link will be in the description below, it's certainly worth checking out the whole thing, where he talked about primarily the last season of the Clone Wars. But within there, though he didn't directly talk about them, we can extrapolate things about balance, what a true Jedi should be, gray Jedi, and if they should or are even a thing, and so on. And so what I'm going to do now is read a part of that interview, or one of Filoni's responses after he was basically asked about Darth Maul and the nature of the dark side. It's a lengthy response, but I think there's so much in there that I'm just going to read it, and we can discuss it afterwards. Anyway, he had this to say. For me, it's in your actions when you're afraid and when you do things to service yourself above other people and when you have a lack of compassion. It's not something that takes hold of you necessarily and grows inside of you. It's a way of belief and action that you adopt. And then because you do that, it gets harder and harder. Think about when you make a mistake and how hard it is for people to tell the truth or to apologize and you spiral out of control. You don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to do something terrible today. But sometimes you do, and then it spirals out of control, and it's hard to get out of the situation. So you know, once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. When you do things for other people, when you're selfless, when you gift something, when you sacrifice time for someone, when you make someone feel better, those are feelings that are good, that uplift you. It's the only way to get that feeling, and then you feel better. That person feels better, and you start a chain reaction in a different way. And the only other Jedi lesson I can teach you today, Padawan, is that you don't conquer the dark side and then that's it. You don't just overcome it. You are tested and tested and tested. There is always another test. These are the trials, and I think people trivialize it into thinking, well, I defeated the dark side. Yes, you did on Monday, but now there's more, because your hubris can get a hold of you. Because remember, Yoda says in the prequels that even the older Jedi have become arrogant. He warns against how the Jedi Order is acting and behaving prior to and then during the Clone Wars, and he sees fractures within them. They're just hoping that they can overcome or outmaneuver the dark side and Sidious before it's too late, and they don't. They almost do, they get close, but they don't. Okay, so as I said before, Filoni doesn't talk directly about things like balancing the Force and gray Jedi here. Yet there's a lot we can still take away about those things. Now, one thing George Lucas has always maintained, and Filoni touches on it here, is that pretty much the core difference between the dark side and the light is that one is selfish and the other is selfless. One is thinking about the self, the other is thinking about, well, others. Which kind of leads to this idea that if you only look inward and you only think of yourself, you're going to end up miserable in the long run. Yoda's words to Anakin in The Phantom Menace sum this up really well, when he talks about how fear is the path to the dark side, but it actually starts at being selfish. Because if all you care about is the things you have or want, you become consumed with this fear of either losing it or never attaining it. And once you do get those things you want, they briefly make you happy, but it doesn't last. And before long, you're thinking about what you want next. So you start accumulating more and more stuff, or in this case, or in the case of the Sith, more and more power. You then start to mistrust people and get angry because you think everyone thinks like you do, that everyone is out for more and more stuff, and that others are seeking to take what is yours. Which then, of course, leads to hatred for all these people that you see as being against you and wanting to take your stuff. Which then leads to suffering, not just your own suffering because you're alone and miserable and you won't trust anyone, but because all you do is care about yourself and to try and take from others before they can take from you, which circles right back to fear and starts everything all over again. And so your only reason for existing becomes to stay as powerful as possible so that no one can ever take your stuff. And one of the things Filoni talks about in this interview is the other side of that coin, the idea that if you give instead of take, if you're selfless, you'll start a different type of chain reaction, one that will lead to joy instead of suffering. The person who seeks to give instead of take, or accumulate, doesn't fear losing their stuff, at least not quite so much. Just because you're willing to and do give doesn't mean people should just be able to take from you. There's a huge difference between giving of your own free will and how that feels over either being told or forced to give, but let's not get too deep into that and instead examine the basic idea here. And so that person who gives of their own free will feels good about themselves. Not only did they help another person, but that other person hopefully will now pay it forward when they can help, and someone else will then pay it forward after them. Again, it's about starting a chain reaction, a positive one. And when your life becomes less about acquiring stuff, and instead about helping and being a part of the lives of others, you have no reason to fear, get angry, or hate other people. And though, let's be real here, your average person is not going to be perfect all the time. They'll have their moments of selfishness. The idea behind the Jedi is they strive to always be selfless, to always put the greater good before themselves or their personal desires. And there's a lot of people that think this is wrong somehow, that they think the Jedi shouldn't be like this, that they shouldn't live like they do and not allow themselves any attachments, that even perhaps always being selfless makes them more susceptible to falling to the dark side because of maybe some sort of growing resentment inside of them over the things they're missing out on in life. Problem is, the idea here, and you don't have to agree with it or want to live your life this way, it doesn't make you a bad person. Anyway, the idea is that by doing nothing but giving, which again brings joy to the person who gives and to the recipient, by living a life in service of something greater than themselves, the Jedi get an incredible feeling of purpose and fulfillment from their life. They don't feel like they're missing out on anything. Instead, they get so much from what they do, from this greater purpose they have devoted themselves to. However, as Filoni talks about, the dark side is not just something you confront and beat one time and you're good forever. It's an ongoing struggle, and a Jedi must always remain vigilant. And oftentimes people talk about gray Jedi, or that the Jedi finding a personal balance between the two within themselves, between the dark and the light, is the correct path, which likely goes back to a misunderstanding of what exactly balance in Star Wars is, which is actually the absence of the Sith or those who use the dark side, not to be confused with the absence of the existence of the dark side itself. I mean, just look at the end of Return of the Jedi. All the Sith are gone, and Luke stands alone on the precipice of rebuilding the Jedi Order, as instructed by Yoda. And according to Lucas, the Force is balanced at this point. Anakin brings balance by destroying Darth Vader, and then Darth Sidious. Because the use of the dark side, as said by Lucas himself, is like a cancer, and cancer left unchecked will grow and fester and eventually kill the host. And probably the best and easiest way to look at balance in Star Wars is to compare it to the human body, and a body is not considered in balance when it has a certain and proper amount of cancer and sickness within it. It's considered balanced and working as intended when it's free of those things. But at the same time, that doesn't mean death, which, yes, is oftentimes the result of cancer and sickness, doesn't have its place or purpose in the grand scheme of things, that it shouldn't exist at all. Death, like it or not, is part of the circle of life, the circle of all things, just like the dark side is a part of all things as well, but that doesn't mean death or the dark side should be embraced. Instead, their existence needs to be acknowledged, and in an odd sort of way, death is what gives our lives meaning and purpose, because if we never died, then nothing we do ever really matters all that much. Similar, I suppose, to how the light couldn't exist without the dark. And so what we need to do is look at the Force and the balance of it as a system working as intended, and not as a scale with equal parts on this side and equal parts on that side, which is what I think hangs a lot of people up. They hear the word balance and immediately their mind conjures up a scale. And so when it comes to the Jedi, there's no reason for them to embrace the dark side or to use equal parts this and that to be the proper or best Jedi they can be, when the Force itself doesn't operate that way. A Jedi absolutely acknowledges and accepts the dark side exists, or they should, We see this in the Yoda story arc in Season 6 of the Clone Wars, but their job is not to partially embrace it, it's to make sure it never grows out of control. Furthermore, the philosophies behind using the two sides of the Force are completely different and at odds with each other. Again, at the core, one is about being selfless, the other selfish. One is about embracing emotions, the other about acting independently of them, using logical thinking instead. Not to mention, the dark side is not any stronger than the light, it's just harder to learn and master because it requires more discipline. The dark side, as Yoda said, is the quick and easy path, it's the shortcut to power. And the purpose behind the Jedi isn't even about acquiring power in the first place. Grey Jedi also ignore the idea that using the dark side comes with a price, that embracing it, even if your intention is good, will come with a cost. In closing here, I'll again say I don't know it all when it comes to Star Wars or the mind of George Lucas, and I'm certainly open to debate and discussions about everything I just talked about. But I at least think the themes George Lucas instilled into Star Wars not only can be deciphered to a large degree, they're really not that complicated or anything. They're just not always laid out, intentionally so perhaps, all that clearly by Lucas in the actual story, though listening to what he says outside of it certainly helps us understand. Anyway, not only do I think they can and should be interpreted and discussed, not only do I think there is much to learn from them, but they should be kept intact going forward. The core ideas behind Star Wars should always be kept in place. And though, no, Dave Filoni is not George Lucas, though he certainly doesn't know everything or get it all, he time and time again proves, at least to me, that he gets it like few, if any others do, and that he is the future of Star Wars. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to weigh in on all this. What do you think about balance? What do you think about the Grey Jedi? Should Dave Filoni be the one dictating, and you could even say safeguarding, the future of Star Wars? Whatever you think, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.